Millionaire saw a homeless girl playing the violin, the song of his childhood love, and was shocked to discover who she was. The rain had stopped, but the streets of Riverside District still gleamed with that slick, oil-stained sheen that made everything look like a watercolor painting left out in the storm. Victor Hale pulled his wool coat tighter as he walked, his Italian leather shoes clicking against cracked pavement that had seen better decades. This wasn't his world anymore, hadn't been for 30 years, but something had drawn him back to these forgotten streets like a moth to a flame that had long since burned out. The irony wasn't lost on him. Here he was, worth more money than most small countries' GDP, walking through the neighborhood where he'd once worn shoes with holes in the soles and eaten government cheese sandwiches for dinner. The buildings looked smaller than he remembered, their brick facades crumbling like old teeth, windows boarded up or covered with newspaper. Progress, they called it when they moved the money elsewhere. Gentrification was supposed to come here eventually, his real estate advisors had told him. Any day now. Any decade now. Victor paused at the corner of Maple and 3rd, where Mrs. Rodriguez used to run her corner store. Now it was just another empty storefront with a for lease sign that had been there so long the phone number had faded to ghost numbers. He could almost hear the bell above the door, could almost smell the mix of Cafe Cubano and cleaning supplies that had been the soundtrack and scent of his childhood. Mrs. Rodriguez had always let him and Mira sit in the back corner, sharing a single Coke and dreaming about the world beyond these streets. Mira. The name hit him like a physical blow, just as it always did. Even after all these years, even after all the therapy and the carefully constructed walls around his heart, her name could still stop him cold. Beautiful Mira Santos, with her long dark hair and eyes that seemed to hold secrets too big for a 17-year-old girl. Mira, who could make him laugh until his sides ached and then kiss him until the whole world disappeared. Mira, who had vanished from his life like morning mist, leaving nothing behind but questions and a hollow ache that had never quite healed. He'd been 18 when she disappeared. One day they were making plans for after graduation, talking about the scholarship he'd earned to study business, dreaming about how they'd make it work even with him going away to college. The next day, she was simply gone. Her aunt, who'd raised her after her parents died, had moved away in the night, taking Mira with her. No forwarding address. No goodbye. No explanation. Victor had tried everything. He'd called every Santos in every phone book he could get his hands on. He'd hired private investigators when he'd finally made enough money to afford them. He'd even gone so far as to hire a team to search through old records, immigration documents, anything that might give him a clue. But it was as if Mira Santos had simply evaporated, leaving behind only the memory of her laugh and the haunting melody she used to play on her violin. The violin. God, how she'd loved that instrument. It had been her grandmother's, the only thing left to her when her parents died in that car accident. The wood was worn smooth where her fingers had held it, and she'd played it like she was pouring her soul directly into the strings. She'd composed her own pieces, little melodies that seemed to capture emotions he didn't even have words for. There was one in particular, something she'd called Autumn Rain, that could make him feel homesick for a place he'd never been. Victor shook his head, trying to dispel the memories. This was exactly why he never came back here. The past was a dangerous country, and he'd learned long ago that looking backward only made you stumble forward. He had a board meeting in the morning, 3 merger deals to review, and a charity gala to attend where he'd write checks that would fund entire school districts. His life was full, purposeful, successful by any measure that mattered. So why did he feel so empty? He was about to turn back toward where his driver waited when he heard it. The sound drifted from somewhere ahead, soft at first, almost lost in the ambient noise of the city. But as he moved closer, it became unmistakable. A violin. Someone was playing a violin, and the melody. Victor's blood turned to ice water in his veins. It was Autumn Rain. Not a similar melody. Not something that reminded him of it. It was exact, note for note, the same haunting tune that Mira used to play when she thought no one was listening. The same melody that had lived in his dreams for 30 years, that sometimes woke him in the middle of the night with tears on his cheeks that he couldn't explain. His feet moved without conscious direction, carrying him toward the sound like a man in a trance. The music was coming from Hartwell Alley, a narrow passage between 2 abandoned buildings that he remembered as being a shortcut to the old music store. His heart hammered against his ribs as he moved closer, each note of the familiar melody striking him like a physical blow. This wasn't possible. No one else knew that song. Mira had never written it down, had never played it for anyone but him. She'd composed it one lazy summer afternoon, sitting on the fire escape outside her aunt's apartment, and she'd told him it was their song. Their secret, something that belonged only to them. Victor reached the mouth of the alley and stopped, his hand pressed against the brick wall for support. There, about 20 feet away, sat a girl. She couldn't have been more than 16 or 17, with long dark hair that caught the light from the street lamp and fell in waves around her shoulders. She was perched on an overturned milk crate, her bare feet tucked under her, playing a violin that looked like it had seen better decades. But it was her face that made Victor's world tilt on its axis. She had Myra's eyes. Not similar eyes. Not the same color or shape. She had Myra's exact eyes, down to the tiny fleck of gold in the left iris, down to the way her lashes cast shadows on her cheeks when she looked down at her instrument. It was like looking at a ghost, like seeing Mira as she'd been all those years ago, young and beautiful and lost in her music. The girl's clothes were worn and patched, her jeans torn at the knees, her sweater unraveling at the cuffs. A small cardboard sign propped against her feet read, "Music for Hope," in careful block letters. A guitar case laid open in front of her held a scattering of coins and a few crumpled dollar bills. But despite her obvious poverty, there was something regal about the way she held herself, something proud and unbroken in the set of her shoulders. She played with her eyes closed, lost in the music, and Victor could see tears tracking down her cheeks in the yellow glow of the streetlight. The melody reached its crescendo, the same soaring passage that had always made his chest tighten with unnamed emotion, and then it ended. The silence that followed was deafening. The girl opened her eyes, and for a moment, their gazes met across the alley. Victor felt like he'd been struck by lightning. Those eyes, so familiar yet belonging to a stranger, studied him with an intensity that made him feel transparent. "That song," he said, his voice coming out rougher than he'd intended. "Where did you learn that song?" The girl's expression shifted, became guarded. She set her violin carefully in the case and started to stand. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Please." Victor stepped closer, and she tensed like a wild animal ready to bolt. "That melody. Autumn Rain. No one else knows that song. Where did you learn it?" Now her eyes widened, and he saw fear flicker across her features. She grabbed her violin case and backed toward the far end of the alley. "I don't know any Autumn Rain. You're mistaken. Wait, please don't go." Victor reached into his wallet, pulling out several $100 bills. "Here, take this. Just tell me where you learned that song." The girl's eyes flicked to the money, and for a moment, he thought she might take it. Then her expression hardened, and she shook her head. "I don't want your money." "Everyone wants money," Victor said, confused. In his experience, money solved most problems, opened most doors, answered most questions. "Not everyone," the girl said quietly. "Some things can't be bought." She was moving away from him now, her bare feet silent on the wet pavement. Victor felt panic rise in his throat. He couldn't let her disappear, not when she might be the key to answers he'd been seeking for 30 years. "What's your name?" he called after her. She paused at the mouth of the alley, looking back over her shoulder. "Lena," she said. "And you're Victor Hale." Victor's blood chilled. "How do you know my name?" But she was already gone, melting into the shadows between buildings like smoke. Victor stood alone in the alley, his expensive shoes planted in a puddle he hadn't noticed, his mind reeling with questions that multiplied faster than he could think them. A homeless girl who looked exactly like his lost love. A girl who knew a song that only Mira had ever played. A girl who knew his name but wanted nothing from him. Victor pulled out his phone with shaking hands and dialed his assistant. "Patricia, I need everything you can find on a girl named Lena. Teenage, lives on the streets, plays violin. I want background checks, social services records, anything you can dig up." "Mr. Hale, it's past midnight." "I don't care what time it is," Victor said, his voice sharp with desperation. "Find her. Find everything about her. And Patricia, this is confidential. Absolute confidentiality." As he walked back to his waiting car, Victor's mind churned with possibilities, each one more impossible than the last. But one thought kept rising to the surface, a thought so incredible and terrifying that he tried to push it away even as it took root in his heart. What if Mira hadn't just disappeared? What if she'd been running from something? Or someone? What if she'd been pregnant? The thought hit him like a physical blow, and he had to stop walking for a moment, leaning against a streetlight for support. The math was impossible to ignore. 17 years since Mira disappeared. A 17-year-old girl with Myra's eyes and Myra's music. A girl who knew his name but wanted nothing from him. Victor climbed into the back of his Mercedes, but instead of giving his driver the address to his penthouse, he heard himself say, "Take me back to the Riverside district tomorrow, first thing in the morning." As the car pulled away from the curb, Victor stared out the window at the passing streets, seeing them now not as the graveyard of his past, but as the possible birthplace of his future. Somewhere in those forgotten alleys and abandoned buildings was a girl named Lena who held the key to questions he'd carried for 30 years. And he was going to find her, no matter what it cost. Even if it cost him everything. Victor hadn't slept. He'd paced his penthouse apartment until dawn, his mind spinning through possibilities and impossibilities in equal measure. When Patricia had called at 7 with her preliminary report, her voice had been carefully neutral in the way that meant she'd found something significant. "There's no record of any Lena matching your description in the local social services database," she'd said. "No school enrollment, no birth certificate on file with the city. But Mr. Hale, there are several Jane Does who've been processed through the juvenile system over the past 2 years. Girls who refuse to give their real names. Send me everything," Victor had said, already reaching for his coat. Now, at 8 in the morning, he stood at the entrance to Hartwell Alley, clutching a coffee that had gone cold an hour ago and a bag of breakfast pastries he'd bought from the French bakery near his building. The alley was empty except for a stray cat picking through an overturned garbage can. She'd been here last night. He was certain of it. But in the harsh light of morning, the whole encounter felt surreal, like something he might have dreamed. Had he really seen those eyes? Had he really heard that impossible melody? Victor waited. He'd built his fortune on patience, on understanding that the best deals came to those who could outlast their desperation. But this felt different. This felt like standing on the edge of a cliff, not knowing if the ground below was solid or if he was about to fall into an abyss. At 9:30, she appeared. Lena emerged from behind a dumpster at the far end of the alley, and Victor realized she must have been watching him, waiting to see if he'd really come back. She looked even younger in the daylight, her dark hair tangled from sleep, her clothes wrinkled like she'd slept in them. Which, Victor realized with a pang, she probably had. She approached slowly, her violin case slung over her shoulder, her eyes never leaving his face. "You came back. I said I would. Rich men say a lot of things." She settled onto her milk crate, but didn't take out her violin. "Doesn't mean they mean them." Victor held out the bag of pastries. "Have you eaten?" Lena's eyes flicked to the bag, and he saw hunger there, carefully hidden but unmistakable. Still, she shook her head. "I told you, I don't want your charity." "It's not charity. It's breakfast. There's a difference." "Is there?" Victor considered this. In his world, the line between generosity and power was often blurred beyond recognition. How many times had he written a check not out of kindness, but out of the need to be seen as kind? How many charitable donations had been calculated more for tax benefits than for genuine compassion? "Maybe not," he admitted. "But you still need to eat." Something in his honesty seemed to surprise her. She took the bag, opened it, and pulled out a croissant. Her first bite was careful, dignified, but Victor could see the restraint it took not to devour it immediately. "Where did you sleep last night?" he asked. "That's not your business." "You're right. It's not." Victor sat down on the ground across from her, ignoring the way his expensive pants immediately absorbed moisture from the wet pavement. "But I'm curious about a lot of things that aren't my business." Lena studied him over her croissant. "Like what?" "Like how you know a song that only one other person ever knew. Like how you know my name when I've never seen you before in my life. Like why you won't take money when you clearly need it. Maybe I don't like the strings that come with rich men's money." "What strings?" Lena laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You really want to know?" "The strings that say you own me now. The strings that say I owe you something. The strings that say I'm grateful and compliant and everything you want me to be because you bought me a croissant and thought that made you my savior." Victor felt like he'd been slapped. "That's not what isn't it?" Lena's eyes blazed with a fury that made her look older, more dangerous. "You show up here with your fancy clothes and your fancy car parked around the corner." "Yes, I saw it." And you think you can buy answers from me like I'm some kind of vending machine. Put in enough quarters and get what you want. I want to help you. Why? The question hung in the air between them. Victor realized he didn't have a good answer, not one that didn't sound selfish or crazy or both. Because, he said finally, I think you might be the most important person I've never met. Lena stared at him for a long moment. Then, to his surprise, she laughed. Really laughed, a sound so much like Myra's that it made his chest ache. That's either the most romantic thing I've ever heard, she said, or the creepiest. I'm hoping for romantic. She smiled then, just a little, and Victor saw a flash of the girl she might have been under different circumstances. A girl who got to be 17 without carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders. Tell me about the song, he said gently. The smile faded. I told you. I don't know what you're talking about. Lena. Victor leaned forward. I heard you play Autumn Rain last night. Note for note, exactly as it was written. That song was never published, never recorded, never played for anyone except. He stopped, unsure how to finish the sentence. Except who? Victor took a deep breath. Except the girl who wrote it. Her name was Mira Santos. I loved her very much, and she disappeared 30 years ago. Lena went very still. The croissant in her hands crumbled, forgotten. 30 years ago, she repeated slowly. Yes. And this Mira Santos. What did she look like? Victor's heart began to pound. She looked like you. Exactly like you. Lena stood up so quickly that her milk crate toppled over. I have to go. Wait, please. But she was already backing away, her violin case clutched against her chest like armor. Don't follow me. Don't look for me. Just leave me alone. I can't do that. Why not? Victor stood too, his hands spread in a gesture of supplication. Because I think Mira Santos was your mother. The words hung in the air like a gunshot. Lena froze, her face going pale, her eyes wide with shock and something that might have been terror. You don't know anything about my mother, she whispered. Then tell me. Help me understand. My mother is dead, Lena said, her voice breaking on the last word. She died 2 years ago, and she never told me who my father was, and I don't need some rich man showing up trying to play games with my life. What if I'm not playing games? Lena's laugh was harsh, bitter. Then you're insane. She turned and ran, disappearing around the corner before Victor could follow. He stood alone in the alley, surrounded by the scattered remains of his breakfast offering, his mind reeling with the implications of what she'd said. Mira was dead, had been dead for 2 years. The knowledge hit him like a physical blow, driving the air from his lungs. All these years, he'd imagined her out there somewhere, living her life, maybe thinking of him sometimes. He'd never seriously considered that she might be gone forever, that all his searching had been for a ghost. But if Mira was dead, and if this girl was her daughter, then… Victor pulled out his phone with shaking hands. Patricia, I need you to search obituaries. 2 years ago, give or take 6 months. I'm looking for Amira Santos, probably in her 40s. Mr. Hale, are you all right? You sound. Just find her, Patricia. Find everything you can about her death, about her life, about any children she might have left behind. As Victor walked back to his car, he felt like a man walking through a minefield. Every step could be the one that changed everything, that shattered the carefully constructed life he'd built on the foundation of unanswered questions. But he couldn't stop walking. Not now. Not when he was so close to the truth, even if that truth might destroy him. Behind him, hidden in the shadows between buildings, Lena watched him go. Her hands were shaking as she pulled out a worn photograph from her jacket pocket. The picture was old, faded, showing a young woman with long dark hair and eyes that sparkled with joy. On the back, in careful handwriting, were the words, "For my daughter, so you'll know where you came from. Your mother loved you more than music, more than dreams, more than her own heart. M.S." Lena had carried this photograph for 2 years, ever since her mother's death. It was all she had left of the woman who'd raised her alone, who'd taught her to play violin, who'd died of cancer in a county hospital with no insurance and no money for proper treatment. The woman who'd made her promise, with her dying breath, to never trust a man named Victor Hale. Lena tucked the photograph back into her pocket and melted deeper into the shadows. She had her mother's eyes, her mother's musical ability, and her mother's stubborn pride. But she also had something her mother had never had, the knowledge that Victor Hale was looking for her. and she intended to find out why before he found out who she really was. 3 days passed before Victor saw her again. 3 days of returning to the alley, of waiting on street corners, of driving slowly through the Riverside district hoping to catch a glimpse of her. Patricia's research had yielded a thin file that raised more questions than it answered. Mira Santos died of cervical cancer at age 45 in County Memorial Hospital. No next of kin listed. No insurance. Buried in an unmarked grave in the county cemetery. The stark facts of her death hit Victor like blows to the chest. Mira, who had deserved so much more from life, had died alone and forgotten. The girl who had once talked about seeing the world, about playing her violin in concert halls across Europe, had died in the charity ward of a public hospital. And Victor had been completely unaware, living his comfortable life, building his fortune, never knowing that the only woman he'd ever truly loved was suffering and dying just a few hours' drive away. On the fourth day, he found a different approach. Instead of waiting in the alley, Victor spent the morning visiting every shelter, every soup kitchen, every place where a homeless teenager might find refuge. He spoke to social workers and volunteers, describing Lena without mentioning her connection to his search for Mira. Most people were cautious, protective of their clients' privacy, but a few were willing to help. "Oh, you mean the violin girl," said Martha, an elderly volunteer at the Riverside Community Center. "She comes here for showers sometimes, when we can manage it. Sweet kid, but so proud. Won't take charity, but she'll work for food. Cleans tables, helps serve meals. When does she usually come in?" Martha studied him suspiciously. "You're not some kind of predator, are you? Because I'll have you arrested faster than you can blink." "No, ma'am. I'm—" Victor struggled for an explanation that wouldn't sound insane. "I knew her mother. I'm trying to help. Her mother's dead." "I know." Something in his voice must have convinced Martha, because her expression softened. "She'll be here tonight for the dinner service. But mister, if you're thinking of dragging her off somewhere, you'll have to go through me first. I just want to talk to her." That's what they all say. That evening, Victor sat in his car across the street from the community center, watching people file in for the free dinner service. Families with children, elderly men pushing shopping carts full of their possessions, women who looked like they'd been pretty once but had been worn down by circumstances beyond their control. At 7:30, he saw her. Lena approached the building from the south, her violin case slung over her shoulder, her hair pulled back in a ponytail that made her look even younger. She moved with purpose, walking straight to the service entrance rather than the main door. Victor waited until she'd been inside for an hour before he entered. The community center dining room was filled with the quiet hum of conversation and the clatter of dishes. Volunteers moved between tables, refilling coffee cups and collecting empty trays. The air smelled of industrial disinfectant and cafeteria food, but the atmosphere was warm, welcoming. He found Lena in the kitchen, elbow deep in soapy water, washing dishes alongside two other volunteers. She'd traded her torn sweater for a community center t-shirt that was too big for her, and her hair was escaping from its ponytail in damp tendrils. She looked so young, so vulnerable, that Victor felt his heart clench with protective instinct. "Excuse me," he said to the volunteer coordinator, a harried-looking woman with kind eyes. "I was hoping to speak with one of your volunteers." "The girl washing dishes?" The woman looked him up and down, taking in his expensive clothes with obvious suspicion. "Are you family?" "It's complicated." "Complicated how?" Before Victor could answer, Lena looked up from the sink and saw him. Her face went through a series of expressions: surprise, anger, resignation, before settling into carefully neutral politeness. "It's okay, Mrs. Chun," she said, drying her hands on a dish towel. "I know him." Mrs. Chun looked between them uncertainly. "You sure, honey?" "I'm sure." Lena untied her apron and walked toward the back exit, gesturing for Victor to follow. They ended up in the center's small garden, a patch of grass and flowers that looked like it was maintained by volunteers with more enthusiasm than expertise. "You're persistent," Lena said, settling onto a concrete bench. "I told you I was curious. Curious enough to track me down at my job?" Victor sat beside her, careful to leave space between them. "I've been thinking about what you said. About your mother." Lena's jaw tightened. "I told you she's dead." "I know. I found her obituary." The words hit Lena like a physical blow. Victor saw her flinch, saw her hands clench into fists in her lap. You investigated her? I had to know. You had to know what? Victor turned to face her fully. Whether you're my daughter. The statement hung between them like a bomb that hadn't exploded yet. Lena stared at him, her face pale in the security light from the building. That's impossible, she whispered. Is it? You have her eyes, her musical ability. You're 17 years old, which means you were born the year after she disappeared. You know a song that only she and I ever knew. Lots of people have dark eyes. Lots of people play violin. But not lots of people play Autumn Rain. Lena was quiet for a long moment, her gaze fixed on her hands. When she spoke, her voice was barely audible. She used to play that song when she thought I was asleep. Late at night, when she'd had too much wine and she was missing something she'd never tell me about. She'd sit by the window with her violin and play the same melody over and over until she cried. Victor felt his throat tighten. Did she ever tell you what it was called? She said it was called The Song of Lost Things. She renamed it. Lena looked up at him then, and Victor saw tears in her eyes. Why would she do that? Because she was running from something. Or someone. From you. The question hit Victor like a knife to the chest. I don't know. God, I hope not. But Lena, I need you to understand something. I never knew about you. If I had known she was pregnant, if I had known she'd had my child, I would have moved heaven and earth to find you both. Maybe that's what she was afraid of. Victor considered this. It was possible. His father had been a powerful man with a long reach and little regard for the collateral damage of his business dealings. If Victor Sr. had found out about Myra's pregnancy, if he'd seen it as a threat to his son's future. My father was not a good man, Victor said quietly. He had very specific ideas about who I should marry, what kind of life I should live. If he found out about Mira, about a baby, he would have made them disappear. Yes. Lena was quiet for a long time, processing this information. Finally, she reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out something small and rectangular. A photograph. This is all I have of her, she said, holding it out to Victor. Victor took the photograph with trembling hands. It was old, faded, but he recognized the face immediately. Mira, probably in her early 20s, smiling at the camera with the joy he remembered from their youth. She looked happy, hopeful, like a woman who believed the world was full of possibilities. He turned the photograph over and read the inscription on the back. The words hit him like a physical blow. For my daughter, so you'll know where you came from. Your mother loved you more than music, more than dreams, more than her own heart. M.S. She loved me, Lena said softly. But she was afraid of something. Or someone. She made me promise, when she was dying, to never trust a man named Victor Hale. Victor felt the world tilt beneath him. She told you my name? She made me memorize it. Said you were dangerous, that you'd try to find me someday, and that I should run if I ever saw you. But you didn't run. Lena shrugged. I was curious too. Victor handed the photograph back to her, his mind racing. If Mira had known his name, had been afraid of him specifically, then someone had told her to be afraid. Someone had convinced her that he was a threat to her and her child. Lena, he said carefully, I think my father might have paid your mother to disappear. I think he might have threatened both of you. Why? Because he saw you as an obstacle to the life he'd planned for me. A life that included marrying the daughter of one of his business partners, producing heirs who would carry on the family legacy, building a dynasty that would last for generations. Did you marry her? Victor laughed bitterly. I tried to. For about 10 years, I tried to be the son he wanted. I married Elizabeth Carrington in a ceremony that cost more than most people make in a lifetime. Had the big house, the country club membership, the proper connections. What happened? I was miserable. And so was she. We divorced after 2 years, and I've been alone ever since. Turns out you can't build a life on someone else's foundation. Lena studied his face in the dim light. Do you really think I'm your daughter? I think it's possible. And I think there's only one way to find out for sure. DNA test. Yes. Lena was quiet for a long moment. Then she stood up, paced to the edge of the garden, and stared out at the street. If I am, she said finally, what happens then? I don't know. That's not very reassuring. Victor joined her at the garden's edge. I can't promise it'll be easy. I can't promise it'll be perfect. But I can promise that if you're my daughter, you'll never be homeless again. You'll never go hungry, never sleep in alleys, never have to wash dishes for food. What if I want to? The question caught him off guard. What? What if I like my life? What if I don't want to be rescued by some rich man who thinks money solves everything? Victor considered this. In his world, poverty was a problem to be solved, not a choice to be respected. But looking at Lena, seeing the fierce independence in her eyes, he realized she might not see it the same way. Then you make that choice, he said. But you make it knowing you have other options. Lena turned to face him. And if the test says I'm not your daughter? Then I'll still want to help you. Because you're Myra's daughter, and I loved her. Because you're 17 years old and living on the streets. Because no one should have to live the way you're living. Even if I don't want your help, even then. Lena smiled, a real smile this time. You're either very kind or very stupid. Probably both. She laughed at that, and the sound was so much like Myra's that Victor felt his heart skip a beat. Okay, she said. I'll take the test. But I have conditions. Name them. First, we do this privately. I don't want to end up in the newspapers as some rich man's lost daughter. Agreed. Second, no matter what the results say, you don't try to control my life. I make my own choices. Agreed. Third, if I am your daughter, you tell me everything. About my mother, about your father, about why she ran. I want the truth, not some sanitized version you think I can handle. Victor hesitated. The truth was uglier than she probably imagined, full of corporate corruption and family secrets that had destroyed lives. But looking at her fierce young face, he realized she deserved nothing less than complete honesty. Agreed, he said. They shook hands then, formally, like two business partners sealing a deal. But Victor felt like he was signing his name to something much more significant than a contract. He was signing up for the possibility of being a father, and he had no idea if he was ready for that or not. As they walked back toward the community center, Lena pulled her violin case off her shoulder. Do you want to hear something? She asked. Of course. She took out her violin, settled it under her chin, and began to play. Not Autumn Rain this time, but something new, something haunting and beautiful and full of possibility. The melody seemed to weave through the night air, transforming the small garden into something magical. When she finished, Victor realized he was crying. What was that? He asked. Something I've been working on, Lena said. I call it the Song of Found Things. And in that moment, sitting in a community center garden with a girl who might be his daughter, Victor felt something he hadn't experienced in 30 years. Hope. The DNA test took 3 days to process. 3 days during which Victor found himself unable to concentrate on anything else. Board meetings blurred together, phone calls went unanswered, and his assistant Patricia started looking at him with the kind of concerned expression usually reserved for people having nervous breakdowns. He spent those 3 days learning about Lena's life in ways that made his chest ache. She'd agreed to let him help her find temporary housing. Not charity, she insisted, but work. Victor had quietly arranged for her to become a part-time music instructor at the community center, teaching violin to children whose parents couldn't afford private lessons. In exchange, she got a small stipend and access to one of the center's transition apartments. Watching her with those children had been a revelation. Lena was patient, encouraging, able to coax music from instruments that had seemed hopeless in small hands. She had Myra's gift for making others believe in their own potential, for finding beauty in unexpected places. On the third day, Victor's phone rang at 6 in the morning. Mr. Hale, Patricia's voice was carefully neutral. The results are in. Victor's heart stopped, and the laboratory confirmed a 99.97% probability of paternity. The words hit Victor like a physical blow. He sat down heavily on his bed, the phone trembling in his hand. Mr. Hale, are you there? I'm here, he managed. Does she know? The lab said they'd contact her directly with her copy of the results. Victor ended the call and stared at his phone for a long time. He was a father, had been a father for 17 years without knowing it. Somewhere in the city, his daughter was probably getting the same news, learning that the homeless life she'd been living could have been prevented if only he'd known she existed. The guilt was overwhelming. His phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Community Center Garden. 1 hour. L. Victor dressed quickly and drove to the Riverside district, his mind spinning with everything he wanted to say and everything he was afraid to admit. He found Lena sitting on the same bench where they'd talked before, but this time she wasn't alone. Beside her sat a cardboard box, old and water-stained, with Myra's things written on the side in black marker. So, Lena said without looking up, Apparently you're my father. Apparently I am. She nodded, as if this confirmed something she'd already suspected. I thought you might want to see these. She opened the cardboard box, and Victor saw that it was full of papers, photographs, and small mementos. Lena reached in and pulled out a bundle of letters tied with a faded ribbon. These are from you, she said, holding them out. Victor took the letters with shaking hands. They were his letters, the ones he'd written to Mira during the first months after she'd disappeared. Letters he'd sent to every address he could find, hoping one would reach her. He'd poured his heart out in those letters, begging her to come back, telling her he loved her, promising her they could work through whatever had driven her away. She kept them, he said wonderfully. All of them, even though she never answered any of them. Victor untied the ribbon and opened the first letter. His own handwriting stared back at him, young and desperate. Mira, please tell me where you are. Please tell me what I did wrong. I love you. I'll wait forever if I have to. Why didn't she answer them? He asked. Lena reached into the box again and pulled out another letter, this one in different handwriting. Because of this, Victor took the second letter and immediately recognized his father's stationery. Expensive paper, embossed letterhead, the kind of formal presentation Victor Sr. had used for all his business correspondence. Miss Santos, the letter began. By now you should have received the funds we discussed. I trust you understand that this arrangement is permanent and non-negotiable. Any attempt to contact my son or to reveal the existence of your child will result in consequences that extend far beyond your own well-being. My son has a bright future ahead of him, and I will not allow a teenage pregnancy to derail his potential. You have been compensated generously for your cooperation. Do not test my resolve. The letter was signed with his father's familiar scrawl and dated 3 weeks after Myra's disappearance. Victor felt sick. How much? What? How much did he pay her? Lena pulled out a bank statement from the box. $50,000. Deposited into an account he opened for her. Victor stared at the statement. $50,000 had seemed like a fortune to a 17-year-old girl with no family and no resources. To his father, it had been pocket change, the cost of removing an inconvenient obstacle from his son's path. She used it to disappear, Lena continued. Changed her name, moved to another state, started over. But she never touched the principal. She lived off odd jobs, welfare when she had to, anything but that money. Why? Because she was proud. And because she was scared. Lena pulled out another document. This one a private investigator's report dated 6 months after Myra's disappearance. Your father hired someone to keep track of her, to make sure she stayed away. Victor read the report with growing horror. The investigator had documented Myra's new address, her job at a diner, even the fact that she was pregnant. His father had known about the baby and had chosen to let them both struggle rather than tell his son the truth. She knew she was being watched, Lena said quietly. She knew that if she contacted you, if she tried to tell you about me, your father would find out. And she was terrified of what he might do. He wouldn't have hurt you, wouldn't he? Victor wanted to deny it, but the words wouldn't come. His father had been capable of remarkable cruelty when it served his purposes. He destroyed businesses, ruined careers, eliminated anyone who stood in his way. Would he have hurt a child to protect his vision of his son's future? Victor was afraid he already knew the answer. There's more, Lena said, reaching into the box again. This time she pulled out a thick manila envelope sealed with tape. She made me promise not to open this unless something happened to her. She said it contained everything I'd need to know about where I came from. Have you opened it? Not yet. I was waiting for you. They opened the envelope together, and what they found inside made Victor's blood run cold. Bank records showing regular payments from his father's company to various accounts over the years. Copies of legal documents establishing a trust fund in Lena's name, with the stipulation that she could only access it if she agreed never to contact the Hale family. Photographs of Victor taken with telephoto lenses, showing him at business meetings, social events, his wedding to Elizabeth. At the bottom of the envelope was a letter in Myra's handwriting, addressed to Lena. My dearest daughter, if you're reading this, then I'm gone and you're old enough to know the truth. Your father is Victor Hale, and I loved him more than I thought it was possible to love another person. When I found out I was pregnant with you, I was the happiest I'd ever been, because you were made from that love. But Victor's father was a dangerous man who saw our love as a threat to his family's legacy. He paid me to disappear, threatened me if I ever tried to contact Victor, and made it clear that neither you nor I would be safe if I disobeyed him. I took his money because I had no choice, but I never spent it because it felt like blood money. I named you Elena, after your great-grandmother, but I called you Lena because it sounded like music. You have your father's stubbornness and my artistic soul, and you are the best thing I ever did with my life. If you're reading this, it means Victor Sr. is probably dead, and it might finally be safe for you to know who you really are. The choice is yours, my love. You can take the money and disappear, start a new life somewhere far from all of this. Or you can find your father and tell him the truth. Whatever you choose, know that you were loved. Every day of your life, you were loved. Victor finished reading the letter with tears streaming down his face. Beside him, Lena was crying too, clutching the pages like they were precious beyond measure. She never told me, Victor said. Even when she was dying, she protected me from the truth about what my father had done. She was protecting you, not from the truth, but from the guilt, Lena said. She knew that if you found out, you'd blame yourself for not looking harder, for not fighting longer. I should have fought longer. You were 18 years old, and your father was one of the most powerful men in the state. What could you have done? Victor thought about this. At 18, he'd been naive, trusting, completely under his father's influence. He believed what he'd been told about Mira choosing to leave, about her not loving him enough to stay. It had never occurred to him that she might have been forced to go. I could have been smarter, he said. I could have seen through his lies. And then what? He would have destroyed you too. Victor looked at his daughter, and felt a surge of protective fury so intense it took his breath away. This girl, who should have grown up with every advantage, had instead spent her childhood moving from place to place, never staying anywhere long enough to form lasting connections. She'd watched her mother work multiple jobs to avoid touching the trust fund money, had learned to be self-sufficient because she'd never been able to depend on anyone else. I'm going to make this right, he said. You can't change the past. No, but I can change the future. Starting now. Lena looked at him warily. What does that mean? It means you're my daughter, and I'm going to act like it. It means you don't have to be alone anymore. I told you, I don't want to be rescued. This isn't about rescue. This is about family. Lena was quiet for a long time, staring at the contents of the cardboard box spread between them. All the secrets, all the lies, all the carefully constructed barriers that had kept them apart for 17 years. I don't know how to be someone's daughter, she said finally. I don't know how to be someone's father. So what do we do? Victor reached over and took her hand. It was small and calloused from years of playing violin, but it felt perfect in his. We figure it out together, he said. One day at a time. Lena squeezed his hand, and for the first time since he'd heard that haunting melody in the alley, Victor felt like maybe, just maybe, everything was going to be okay. But first, there was something he needed to do. Lena, he said, how would you feel about visiting your mother's grave? I think it's time I properly introduced myself. The county cemetery was a stark, treeless expanse of grass and granite that stretched toward the horizon like a stone garden. Victor had visited many cemeteries in his life, his parents, business associates, society friends, but this was different. This felt like a pilgrimage. Lena sat beside him in the Mercedes, clutching a bouquet of white lilies they'd bought at a flower shop on the way. She'd been quiet during the drive, staring out the window at the passing landscape with an expression Victor couldn't read. She's in Section G, Lena said as they pulled through the cemetery gates. Plot 247. No headstone. The words hit Victor like a physical blow. No headstone. After everything Mira had been through, everything she'd sacrificed, she'd been buried in an unmarked grave like someone who didn't matter, someone who had no one to remember her. They found the plot easily enough, a small rectangle of grass that looked exactly like all the others surrounding it. The only indication that anyone was buried there was a small metal marker with a number on it, the kind used for temporary identification until families could afford proper headstones. Victor knelt beside the grave and placed his hand on the grass. Somewhere beneath the earth was the woman he'd loved more than his own life, the woman who'd borne his child and kept her existence secret to protect them both. Hello, Mira, he said softly. I'm sorry it took me so long to find you. Lena knelt beside him and placed the lilies on the grave. I brought him, Mama, just like you said I might someday. They stayed there in silence for a long time, Two people connected by love for someone who was no longer there to love them back. Victor found himself talking to the grave, telling Mira about his life, about the business he'd built, about the empty years without her. He told her about finding Lena, about the DNA test, about the letters in the cardboard box. I'm going to take care of her, he promised. The way I should have been taking care of both of you all along. She doesn't need taking care of, Lena said quietly. She needs a father. I don't know how to be one. Neither did she, when I was born. But she figured it out. Victor looked at his daughter, this fierce, independent girl who'd survived 17 years on her own strength and her mother's love. How did she do it? Raise you alone, I mean. Lena smiled, her eyes distant with memory. She made everything into a game. When we had to move suddenly, it was an adventure. When we didn't have much money for food, we were gourmet chefs creating masterpieces from whatever we could afford. When the electricity got shut off, we were camping indoors. She sounds amazing. She was. But she was also scared all the time. I didn't understand it when I was little, but now I know she was always looking over her shoulder, always waiting for someone to find us. Victor felt the weight of his father's legacy settling on his shoulders like a lead blanket. Even after death, Victor Sr.'s cruelty continued to ripple outward, affecting lives he'd never even met. Lena, he said carefully, the trust fund your mother mentioned in her letter. Do you want to access it? She shook her head immediately. I don't want that money. It's blood money, just like she said. What if we used it for something she would have approved of? A scholarship fund for young musicians, maybe. Or a program to help homeless teenagers. Lena considered this. She always said music could save people. Maybe we could start a music program. For kids like me. Kids like you. Kids who don't have anywhere to go. Kids who've aged out of foster care, or run away from bad situations, or just fallen through the cracks. Music gives you something to hold on to when everything else is falling apart. Victor felt a surge of pride so intense it made his chest ache. This girl, his daughter, had taken the worst experience of her life and was already thinking about how to use it to help others. I think that's exactly what your mother would have wanted, he said. They sat by the grave until the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold that reminded Victor of the sunsets he and Mira used to watch from the fire escape outside her aunt's apartment. As the light faded, Lena pulled out her violin. Would it be okay if I played something? She asked. Of course. She settled the instrument under her chin and began to play. Not Autumn Rain this time, but something new, something that seemed to weave together joy and sorrow, loss and hope, endings and beginnings. The melody floated across the cemetery, transforming the stark landscape into something beautiful and holy. When she finished, Victor realized they weren't alone anymore. A small crowd had gathered at a respectful distance, other visitors to the cemetery who'd been drawn by the music. An elderly man with tears in his eyes, a young mother holding a sleeping baby, a groundskeeper who'd stopped his work to listen. They stood in silence for a moment, united by the power of Lena's music, then quietly dispersed. What was that piece? Victor asked. Something I've been working on. I call it Song for the Lost Ones. It was beautiful. Music should tell stories, Lena said, carefully placing her violin back in its case. Mama taught me that. Every song should say something true about what it means to be human. As they walked back to the car, Victor made a decision. Lena, I want to ask you something, and I want you to think carefully before you answer. Okay. Would you consider coming to live with me? Not because you can't take care of yourself, but because families should be together when they can be. Lena stopped walking. In your penthouse? We could find something else. A house, maybe. Somewhere that feels more like home. What would people think? You suddenly showing up with a teenage daughter you've never mentioned? Victor realized she was right to be concerned. His social circle would be curious, possibly suspicious. The media might take interest in the story. His business associates would wonder about the implications for his estate planning. And then he realized he didn't care about any of that. Let them think whatever they want, he said. You're my daughter. That's the only thing that matters. Lena studied his face in the dim light. You really mean that? I really do. What about my music? What about the program we talked about starting? We'll do it together. Father-daughter project. And you won't try to change me? Make me into some kind of society princess. Victor laughed. Have you met you? I don't think anyone could change you if you didn't want to be changed. That's true. They reached the car, but neither of them moved to get in. The cemetery was peaceful around them, full of the kind of silence that felt expectant rather than empty. Okay, Lena said finally. But I have conditions. More conditions? I keep my job at the community center. I keep teaching violin to those kids. Agreed. And I want to finish high school. Real school, not some fancy private academy where everyone knows I'm Victor Hale's daughter. If that's what you want. And we visit Mama's grave once a month. Together. Victor felt his throat tighten. I'd like that. And we get her a proper headstone. Yes. And Lena hesitated, then plunged ahead. And you tell me about her. About what she was like when you knew her. About how you fell in love. About all the things I never got to ask her. I'll tell you everything I remember. Lena nodded, satisfied. Then she surprised him by reaching over and hugging him, quick and fierce. Thank you, she whispered. For what? For not giving up. For finding me. Victor hugged her back. This daughter he'd never known he had. This gift that had emerged from 30 years of grief and searching. Thank you for letting me find you, he said. As they drove back toward the city, Lena asked, what do I call you? I mean, Victor seems weird now, but Dad feels too. She trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. Too soon, Victor suggested. Yeah, we'll figure that out too. We don't have to rush anything. Okay. Lena was quiet for a moment, then said, Victor? Yes. Do you think Mama would be happy? About us finding each other. Victor thought about the woman who'd given up everything to protect her daughter, who'd died without ever telling her child who her father was, who'd carried the weight of his father's threats for 17 years without ever breaking. I think, he said carefully, that your mother loved you enough to make the hardest choice a parent can make. She gave you up to keep you safe. And now you're safe, and you're loved, and you're exactly the kind of person she hoped you'd become. So yes, I think she'd be happy. Good, Lena said, settling back in her seat. Because I want to make her proud. You already have. As the lights of the city grew brighter ahead of them, Victor felt something he hadn't experienced in 30 years, the sense that his life was finally moving in the right direction. He had a daughter. He had a purpose beyond accumulating wealth and building businesses. He had a chance to be the kind of father that his own father had never been. It wasn't going to be easy. There would be challenges, adjustments, moments when they'd both want to retreat to the safety of their separate lives. But for the first time since Mira had disappeared all those years ago, Victor felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. The next morning, he called his lawyer and had him start the paperwork to change Lena's last name to Hale. Then he called a realtor and asked her to find him a house with good acoustics and room for a music studio. And then he called a monument company and ordered the finest headstone they made, with an inscription that read, Mira Santos, beloved mother, musician, guardian of dreams. It was time to start building the life they should have had all along. 6 months later, the Riverside Community Center had been transformed. What had once been a simple soup kitchen and shelter now housed the Mira Santos Music Academy, a state-of-the-art facility that provided free music education to underserved youth throughout the city. The grand opening was scheduled for a Saturday evening in October, exactly 1 year after Victor had first heard Lena playing in that graffiti-stained alley. Victor stood in the lobby of the renovated building, watching contractors put the finishing touches on the display cases that would house donated instruments. The space was beautiful. High ceilings, excellent acoustics, practice rooms with soundproofing that had cost more than most people's annual salaries. But it was also warm, welcoming, the kind of place where a scared teenager might feel safe enough to ask for help. Dad, you're hovering again. Victor turned to see Lena approaching, violin case in hand, looking amused. She'd started calling him Dad about 3 months ago, casually, as if the word had always been part of her vocabulary. Every time she said it, Victor felt like he might cry with happiness. I'm not hovering, he protested. I'm supervising. Same thing. Lena grinned and stood beside him, surveying the bustling lobby. It looks amazing. Your mother would be proud. I know she would. Over the past 6 months, they'd fallen into a rhythm that felt surprisingly natural. Lena had moved into the house Victor had bought in a quiet neighborhood midway between his penthouse and the Riverside district, close enough to his old world that he could still conduct business, close enough to her community center that she could continue her volunteer work. The house was nothing like his sterile penthouse apartment. It had character, warmth, a music room where Lena could practice without disturbing the neighbors. Living with a teenager had been an adjustment. Victor had quickly learned about late-night music sessions, about the importance of keeping the refrigerator stocked with specific brands of cereal, about the way 17-year-old girls could be sunny and cheerful one moment and devastatingly sarcastic the next. He'd also learned about parent-teacher conferences, about helping with homework, about the particular terror of realizing your daughter was old enough to date. Speaking of hovering, Lena said, Marcus is going to be here tonight. Marcus was a senior at Lena's high school, a trumpet player who'd been trying to ask her out for months. Victor had met him exactly once and had immediately decided he wasn't good enough for his daughter. This was probably unfair, considering no boy would ever be good enough for his daughter, but Victor felt entitled to some irrational paternal protectiveness. I thought this was a professional event, Victor said carefully. It is. He's performing with the youth orchestra. Right? Of course. Lena laughed and patted his arm. Relax, Dad. I can handle myself. I know you can. That doesn't mean I have to like it. The truth was, Victor was proud of how well Lena had adjusted to her new life. She'd thrown herself into her studies, maintaining a 4.0 GPA while also teaching violin lessons at the community center and working with architects and contractors to design the music academy. She'd insisted on being involved in every aspect of the project, from choosing the acoustical materials to interviewing potential instructors. The academy had been her idea, but it had become their shared passion. They'd spent countless evenings at the kitchen table, poring over blueprints and budgets, arguing about programming and policies. Victor had never enjoyed any business project more. 5 minutes until the guests arrive, Patricia announced, appearing at Victor's elbow with her tablet and her usual expression of competent efficiency. She'd taken to Lena immediately, treating her like the daughter she'd never had. The mayor's office called to confirm he'll be here for the ribbon cutting, and the symphony orchestra director wanted me to tell you how excited she is about the partnership program. Thank you, Patricia. How do I look? Like a man who's about to cry, Lena said. Which is probably accurate. She wasn't wrong. Victor had been emotional all day, thinking about everything that had led to this moment. A year ago, he'd been a successful but essentially lonely man, going through the motions of a life that felt hollow despite all its material comforts. Now he was about to open a music academy named after the woman he'd loved and lost, standing beside the daughter who'd been hidden from him for 17 years. The transformation wasn't just in the building or in their lives. It was in Victor himself. He'd discovered that being a father was nothing like running a business. You couldn't control teenagers the way you could control board meetings. You couldn't solve their problems by writing checks or making phone calls to the right people. You had to listen, really listen, and trust them to make their own mistakes and learn their own lessons. It had been terrifying and wonderful in equal measure. Places, everyone. Patricia announced as the first guests began arriving. Victor watched through the glass doors as people streamed into the lobby. Community leaders, city officials, families from the neighborhood, music teachers from across the state. But the people he was most excited to see were the teenagers, kids from foster care, runaways, homeless youth who'd been referred by social workers and counselors throughout the city. Those were the kids the academy was really for. Kids like Lena had been, who needed music not just as education, but as salvation. The evening proceeded beautifully. The mayor gave a speech about the importance of arts education. The symphony director talked about the pipeline the academy would create for young musicians, and Victor found himself standing at a podium, looking out at a crowd of people who believed in the same dream he and Lena had been nurturing for months. A year ago, he began, I thought I knew what success looked like. I had a profitable business, financial security, all the markers of achievement that our society values. But I was missing the most important thing of all, purpose. He found Lena in the crowd, standing near the back with Martha from the community center and some of the kids she'd been teaching. She smiled at him encouragingly. This academy exists because a remarkable young woman taught me that music isn't just about entertainment or even education. It's about connection. It's about finding your voice when the world seems determined to silence you. It's about creating beauty in the midst of chaos. Victor's voice caught, and he had to pause for a moment to collect himself. Mira Santos understood that music could save lives. She passed that understanding to her daughter, who passed it to me. Tonight, we're passing it to all of you, in the hope that you'll carry it forward to the next generation of young people who need to know that they matter, that their voices deserved to be heard. The applause was thunderous, but Victor barely heard it. He was watching Lena, who was crying openly now, her hand pressed to her heart. After the ribbon cutting, after the tours and the speeches and the performances by the youth orchestra, the crowd began to thin. Victor found himself in the main performance hall, a beautiful space with soaring ceilings and perfect acoustics, watching the cleanup crew restore order to the chaos of opening night. It was perfect, Lena said, appearing beside him. Mama would have loved it. Do you really think so? I know so. She always said that the best way to honor someone's memory was to continue their work in the world. This is her work, Dad. Music that heals, music that connects, music that gives people hope. Victor nodded, too emotional to speak. Over the past year, he'd learned that grief wasn't something you got over. It was something you learned to carry differently. The pain of losing Mira would always be with him, but now it was tempered by the joy of finding Lena, by the knowledge that Myra's love lived on in their daughter. There's something I want to give you, Lena said, pulling a small wrapped package from her jacket pocket. Victor opened it carefully and found himself holding a CD in a plain jewel case. The label read, "Songs My Mother Taught Me," in Lena's careful handwriting. I recorded it in the studio upstairs, she explained. All the pieces Mama used to play, including Autumn Rain. I thought you might want to have them. Victor held the CD like it was made of glass. Lena, I know it can't bring her back, but maybe it can bring back some of the good memories. All my memories of her are good memories, Victor said. Even the sad ones, because they're proof that what we had was real. They stood together in the empty performance hall, father and daughter, surrounded by the instruments and music stands and dreams made manifest. Outside, the city hummed with its usual energy, but in here, everything was peaceful, purposeful, full of possibility. Dad, Lena said softly. Yes. What happens now? Victor considered the question. Tomorrow, he'd go back to his office, back to his meetings and his mergers and his carefully scheduled life. But he'd also come home to a house that felt like a home, to a daughter who challenged him and inspired him and reminded him every day that love was the only success that really mattered. Now we keep going, he said. We run this academy. We help these kids. We make sure your mother's music lives on in the world. And we figure out how to be a family, day by day, note by note, until we've created something beautiful together. Lena smiled and leaned against his shoulder. I like that plan. Good, because I'm going to need your help with the next part. What's the next part? Victor gestured toward the performance hall, toward the academy, toward the future they were building together. I want to establish a foundation, the Mira Santos Foundation for Youth Music Education. I want to create programs like this all over the country, maybe all over the world. I want to make sure that no kid who loves music has to choose between eating and learning to play. That's a big dream, Dad. Your mother deserves a big dream. Lena was quiet for a moment, thinking. Then she nodded. Okay, but I want to be involved in every decision. This isn't just your foundation, it's ours. Deal. They shook hands solemnly, and then Lena laughed and hugged him instead. I love you, Dad, she said. I love you too, sweetheart. More than I ever thought it was possible to love anyone. As they walked toward the exit together, Victor felt like his life was finally complete. Not because he'd found his daughter, though that was part of it. Not because he'd found a way to honor Myra's memory, though that mattered too. He felt complete because he'd learned the difference between success and fulfillment, between having everything and having enough. He had a daughter who challenged him to be better than he'd ever thought he could be. He had work that mattered beyond profit margins and stock prices. He had the memory of a love that had shaped him and the reality of a love that sustained him. The Music Academy would help hundreds of kids over the years. The foundation would help thousands more. But the real miracle was simpler and more profound. A father and daughter finding each other across 30 years of separation, learning that family isn't just about blood or DNA or shared history. Sometimes family is about choosing to love someone, choosing to stay, choosing to build something beautiful together from the broken pieces of the past. As Victor locked the door of the academy behind them, he could swear he heard something, the faint sound of a violin, playing a melody that sounded like joy and sorrow and hope all woven together. He looked at Lena, who was smiling like she heard it too. Come on, Dad, she said, linking her arm through his. Let's go home. And they did. walking through the streets of the Riverside district together, two people who'd found their way back to each other despite impossible odds, ready to face whatever music the future might bring. Behind them, the Mira Santos Music Academy stood ready to welcome its first students, its windows glowing with warm light, its rooms waiting to be filled with the sound of young voices learning to sing their own songs. It was, Victor thought, the perfect ending and the perfect beginning. If you made it to the end, please like the video and subscribe to our channel. It truly means the world to us. See you in the next one.